And so after I graduated from Fitchburg State, I worked in Fitchburg at the charter school there, Sizer School. So I was an 8th and 9th grade history teacher there for 4 years until I left that, went to graduate school at the University of Texas for 18 months, an accelerated program, and now live and work in Washington, D.C. in Congress.
Marissa, I graduated, well, I walked in May of 2008, but I technically graduated and finished up in January of 2009 originally from South Coast, Massachusetts, so about an hour and a half away from campus. And actually after graduation, I lived in Fitchburg for a little over 10 years, and now I live in Ashburnham, so not that far away. When I was an undergrad at Fitchburg State, I started as a business major and then realized that that really wasn't for me and it wasn't what I wanted to do. And I served as an orientation leader. So I was there over the summer doing summer orientation and helping students pick classes. And I found that communication sounded a lot more appealing as I was helping other students register. So I switched my major halfway through my time the summer after my sophomore year and graduated from the communications department with concentration in professional communications. My first job out of college was actually also in Fitchburg. I was the events and marketing manager for the Chamber of Commerce. Was there for a little over 4 years, spent a couple months at another chamber locally, and then ended up in healthcare, which was completely different, but did marketing, communication, and events for a healthcare system locally in Gardner, Mass. And for the past just over a year, I've transferred into higher education, and I work in marketing at Franklin Pierce University, which is right over the line in Rindge, New Hampshire.
Nice. Thank you. So I want you to go way back to when you were a student. And if you could share some of the things you did either, while you were in school or right after that helped to build your skills and build your resume for when you actually graduated.
Marissa, you want to?
Sure, I can go first. So as a freshman, I was the only person from my high school to go to Fitchburg State, which was appealing because most of my fellow high school classmates went to Bridgewater State to pursue teaching or UMass Amherst because it's like a city. So it was a really great opportunity to start over. That being said, it was incredibly intimidating because I did not know a single person at Fitchburg State. I had a very outgoing roommate, thankfully, who basically forced me to join student government as a freshman as a representative. Went up to people and had them write my name on the ballot. I had no idea that was happening. So joined student government as a freshman, and that really led to basically all the other opportunities that I had on campus. I worked my way up through student government my senior year. I was the vice president of the student body. I served on various committees with faculty, staff, and administration, going over policy. Served on many event planning committees. I was an orientation leader. I also was a student employee in the Student Development Center. I drove a campus van. I worked in the game room. I worked in what used to be called the pub, but I think it's called something else now. And I also worked one summer as the coordinator for the summer orientation program. So although I probably wouldn't have done any of those things if my roommate hadn't forced me into student government, it really opened a lot of opportunities for me. And by the time I graduated, I had so much experience event planning, running meetings, being in meetings with faculty and administration. And it really just helped as I transitioned into the workforce, it be a little less intimidating because as a student, I was able to be part of those conversations. I was able to help change policies for the school and just learn really to balance my time between studies, socialization, and then having, work responsibilities and club and organization responsibilities on campus.
So our third panelist has joined us. Hi, Steferine. So we'll all have Timothy answer the question. We're only 2 questions in, so you're perfect. You're fine. And then I'll have you introduce yourself. So go ahead. We're talking about things that while you were as a student, you did to build your skills and build your resume.
So some of the things I did were like school specific and some were not. So almost every summer I worked at the Upward Bound program. So I was a residential counselor there and then a residential supervisor. So that summer experience, which was super practical and relevant to my degree, directly impacted my, my career opportunities after I graduated, leading to getting a job in Fitchburg at a school. In addition to that, I was a tutor for all 4 years at Fitchburg State. So that gave me a lot of great opportunities, not only to reinforce a lot of the material that I was learning in my classes, but also I sort of tried to take some leadership roles there, becoming a tutor trainer, working in the tutoring office, processing and doing some of the administrative tasks, and trying to just build out the tutoring program. So those two things, and I'd say the last thing, which is people don't realize when you're at Fitchburg State is a little bit unique, is the relationships that you get to build with your professors, since classes are so small. If you're at UMass, you have 300, 400, 500 person classrooms. But when you're at Fitchburg State, you have 30 people, maybe at most. And so if you can build those relationships, I often found that my professors would give me great opportunities. My professors also would give me better ways to develop my skills that were maybe a little more individualized than the rest of the course or the rest of the generalized curriculum. So those are, I think, 3 ways that I kind of leveraged my time at Fitchburg State.
Nice. All right, Steferine, you want to introduce yourself a little and then talk a little about, because you're a more recent alum. So introduce yourself, tell us a little about where you went right after graduation and maybe some experiences when you were a student.
Absolutely. I apologize for my lateness. I was having technical difficulties, but I'm here now. My name is Steferine Baez, and I graduated in 2018. So I've been out of school for 2 years. I was an English literature major, though I started as a secondary education major, and I ended up dropping my concentration to pursue student affairs instead of secondary education. So I am looking for jobs just to define student affairs on college campuses, but not on the academic side of things. I had a lot of classroom experiences in addition to my major. So because I was in the secondary ed program for so long, I did a lot of student teaching in Fitchburg and Leominster and around that area. But I also had minors in Italian studies and studied abroad in Italy and Spain. I had a minor in psychology, and I took a lot of women's studies classes, for example. So I tried to get as well-rounded of an education as I could, just kind of squeeze all opportunities out of Fitchburg State as I could. I had a lot of jobs on campus. So from freshman year, I was employed in the admissions office. So I was a tour guide. I worked in the student campus center at the volunteer center. So we did a lot of event planning with civic engagement and community service for the student body. And I worked in the public relations office, rounding out like 20 hours every single week, which was the limit on campus, working with our social media and blogging team. So I kind of credit those 3 experiences for really honestly steering me away from what originally was my plan, because I just found that passion in working with the student body, and all of those experiences continue to push me towards wanting to do that in my professional life as well. There's a joke that by the time I was in my 4th and then my 5th year in college, people were like, I totally thought you worked here. I didn't know you were a student. And I was like, yep, that happens. So a lot of the clubs that I was in ended up evolving into these roles where I was having paraprofessional level work, whether it be, taking students on a trip where you have to take a flight and get the funding and do that, driving to DC for the Women's March, all sorts of different things that I think it's hard to succinctly explain. But definitely what I found was that I wanted to go into working with college students. Now, when I graduated, my first job was actually with high school students. I think I wanted to just confirm for myself that I wanted to sort of abandon the idea of being a teacher. So I did something that was sort of in between. And I was a college counselor in a high school. So I worked in that space, assisting students with the application process. I did that through an AmeriCorps program. So it was attached to Boston University. I was an employee at BU, so I had all the benefits of being an employee at BU, but I was working every day at East Boston High School. So that's a cool program if anybody wants to hear more about that. If you're interested in school counseling or even being a teacher, it might be a cool kind of gap year. And I was able to take classes at BU during the year that I was employed there. So just having 12 credits, even though I haven't finished a program, but that I can transfer to whatever school I apply to for a higher education degree. That's kind of cool. And then this past year, I'm glad, just to wrap up, to have been able to join a residence life department, which is one of the areas that I could see myself in for a longer term. So I was at MassArt, which is the public art college in Boston, right in the Fenway area near the MFA. Living on campus, so not paying rent for free, and enforcing policies, after hours and such. You all know, if you have lived on campus before, what a resident director does. So I had a student staff of 12 over 2 buildings, and it was kind of wild to do that, obviously, during the pandemic. So lots of experience in 1 year. That feels like I've done it for 5 years. So I'm sure I'll be able to think of more other things to share, but that's just kind of a quick introduction. I also started as an alumni board member right when I graduated. So I'm actually 2 years deep into being on the Fitchburg State Alumni Association Board of Directors. So that's kind of a cool experience that you could do right after graduating. I would recommend it too, because you have that fresh perspective, and there's a lot of old white men on that board. So we need some fresh faces and some different faces.
Nice, thank you. So next question is to go back, and would you do anything differently as a student? Knowing what you know now with some perspective, is there anything you would change, either do or maybe not do? We'll mix up the order. We'll go Timothy, Steferine, then Marissa.
I feel like I want to say no, just because I feel like everything was a great learning experience, even the stupid things I did or the mistakes I made. So maybe I would just answer that question a different way, which is, I think it's really important to try to learn as you're going ways to turn what you perceive as failures into something that you can use for your success. So if that's, for example, I started as a nursing major and was a nursing major my freshman in the first half of my sophomore year. And then I ended up not liking it and switching my major. That totally set me back because a lot of those classes are not transferable to other degrees. But it gave me a great perspective on a different field. And even today, I still use a lot of those skills and that knowledge from my nursing, like fourth of a nursing degree to do things that I do today. So I would just emphasize, using those things, mistakes that you're perceiving to learn from.
Yeah, I definitely echo what Timothy just said. I would add, I think personally that I had so much going on that I should have learned to be more picky with what I was putting on my plate. And that's so hard because it's important wherever you are to give as much of yourself as you can. Schoolwork coming first, but when you're joining, clubs or adding extra jobs to your plate, I think it was hard for me to let go of something that I cared about in order to add something new, if that makes sense. You want to make sure that whatever you're choosing to add is helping you grow. If you're somewhere and you feel like you give more of yourself, but you're not learning anything, it might be time to let something go. And I think that that's something that I've been better at doing after college than during. Learning to say, I actually gained a lot from that experience. It wasn't my favorite the whole time. It became more stressful than it was, a place of joy for me. So let me let it go. that and, maybe saving more money during college as much as possible would kind of be the two things that I would change, I think, if I could go back.
So I guess I agree with the two panelists before me. I don't know that I would change anything. I think looking back many years now, I probably just would have just try to enjoy the time more. I felt like I had to do everything all the time. A couple of weeks after arriving on campus, I was joining student government. And then by my sophomore year, I was an orientation leader and I was working on campus, and I was part of, I don't know if it exists anymore, but at the time it was called the Leadership Academy. So all of my general electives were with the same group of people. So for example, like your sciences, your writing classes, they were slightly different. And I was with that same group of people for all of those. And as I mentioned earlier, I did change my major after over the summer after my sophomore year, because I realized that the only classes I was looking forward to were my non-major classes. And I thought, if this is going to be my career, I should probably adjust this. And it's something I have talked to the communications department about quite frequently, that calling it professional communications doesn't really say what that is. So I didn't find the program that really spoke to me until I was 2 years in. And thankfully, I was working through summer orientation and helping students register, and realized, wow, their course load looks a lot more interesting than what I'm doing. So I think I was just in kind of like go mode. And until I stopped, I realized, okay, I'm not enjoying the part that I really should be enjoying academically. While the general electives are great, you should really have passion about what your major is. So I think what I learned to do maybe 2 years late was just lean into where my skill set was, which was organization and writing. And that's how I ended up, in the careers that I have been today. I will say I don't regret joining all the clubs and organizations. Student government, I was part of what they called at the time. It was called 1 in 10 and Friends. I think now it's like the Gay Straight Alliance. But my roommate and I helped bring the first drag show to Fitchburg State and do all these things that now, looking back, are still events, which is wonderful. It's amazing to see how they've grown and changed over the years. And I still have a lot of great relationships from some professors, students, my classmates, but also some administrators there. I had a wonderful and still continue to have a great relationship with, I think he's the Associate Director of Student Development, but Shane Franzen, which I'm sure many of you on the call know. He actually officiated my wedding. So that speaks to the relationships that I was able to build at Fitchburg State. And shortly after I graduated, I also joined the Alumni Board of Directors and served for a couple of years. But then working in the field I was, doing events, a lot of late nights and kind of off hours stuff. So I just had to pull back because I couldn't make that work with my job commitments. But I think, I'm glad I tried all the different things I did. It helped me figure out, I guess, what I didn't want to do after college, what fields I didn't want to work in. I didn't want to necessarily work in, I guess, what you would call corporate America. I did kind of end up there in healthcare. But I started out at a smaller business where I had a little more freedom and autonomy to make marketing and communication decisions. And I credit that to really the rigorous coursework of the communications department, specifically Rob Carr. I took 4 classes in one semester with him, which, looking back, I'm not sure how I survived that. But it really got me ready to deal with all of the challenges, that I've dealt with in my career, whether it be workload. I mean, recently, obviously, all of us trying to learn how to work remotely and deal with a pandemic. And even in my new role, supervising a staff, some of my time at Fitchburg State, working in student government and on these clubs and organizations and being on these boards and in leadership roles really helped set some of the foundation for the skills I would need to do that.
Great, thank you. Can you name 1 or 2 skills that you think are important for building networking relationships? We'll just reverse the order. Let's go Marissa, Steferine, Timothy.
Sure. So I have a little unique perspective on this because my first job out of school, I mentioned I worked for a Chamber of Commerce, and what I did was essentially run and plan all the networking events. So I was very behind the table all of the time. So to be honest, it was a running joke that once I left that job, I actually didn't know how to attend a networking event. I only knew how to work it, which there's benefits in working it. You're sitting at registration, you're meeting all of these business leaders. and you are remembering their names, you're having constant interaction with them, you're learning about their businesses, but you're not attending the same way as, you know, a representative from a local bank or another local company would attend and go in and kind of sell themselves and give their pitch. So it took me a little while to develop that side of it, but it also gave me a different avenue to, you know, all of the business leaders in the area. I've often said that it's probably the best possible job I could have had as a 22-year-old college graduate. I was on a first name basis with, you know, the general managers of all the hotels in the area, all of the bank presidents, really all of the businesses that really made up the landscape of Fitchburg, Leominster, and the surrounding communities. And even to this day, many years later, I run into people from my quote chamber days when I went to apply after about 4.5 years after graduation. I had done an internship as part of the communications program, which many people do. It's a semester-long internship. And I worked in the public relations and marketing department at Lowell General Hospital. And at that time, I thought, okay, this was great. I have no desire to go into healthcare. It was very structured. The branding was very constrained. And I thought I needed to do something that offered a little more creativity, which is why I ended up at the chamber. It was a much smaller organization, and we had a lot more flexibility in the programming we wanted to offer. But, you know, I took a lot of pride in my internship. I learned a lot. I kind of went in there, as you'd say, like a sponge, and just tried to get everything I could out of it. That being said, it was a long 15 weeks driving from campus to Lowell every day, especially during January and February and March, in multiple snowstorms. But, you know, I really took pride in what I did. I, you know, did my best to make good impressions, and they wanted to offer me a job. There just wasn't funding to offer a position at that time, which I understood. So I, you know, applied, I job searched, and I ended up at the chamber. When I decided it was time for me to do something else, I found that there was a marketing communications job at the local healthcare system about 20 minutes from where I was living. And I applied, and I got a call. And it was actually the director of PR at the time was my internship supervisor from about 4 or 5 years ago. We had lost touch. But she remembered me. Obviously, I had gone on to do, you know, different things for work. So we reconnected. But between that and I had worked a little bit with some of the administration at the hospital in my chamber days, it just got my foot in the door for an interview. So once I got the interview, it was up to me to show what I had been doing over the past 4+ years and show that I was going to be the right fit for the position. But I think it just reinforced that, you know, that time during my undergrad where I was, you know, working 40 hours a week during internship, unpaid, you know, driving, I think 8+ hours a week, you know, back and forth while serving as vice president of student government, working in the pub, driving the campus van on the weekends. You know, I kind of ran myself a little ragged, I think, but it really did pay dividends down the line. So it's not always about attending networking events. I think it's really the lasting impression that you can make on the people you encounter, especially during your undergrad time. Because if you stay, you know, in the area, I think you have a lot of opportunity to run into people who know the Fitchburg State name, who you've maybe connected with as a student. Maybe they know your professor. There's a way to make that connection. And even if you know, leave the area, you're back, you know, perhaps where you grew up, even out of state, there's a lot of times where you can find a connection that someone had to Fitchburg State, and it starts that conversation, and you can kind of get your foot in the door, and then it's your opportunity to sell yourself.
I always love these like events and webinar things because I feel like I learned just as much, right? Like we are listening to each other at the same time. I'm just gonna take notes, mental notes. I wanted to say that one of the, and this might seem weird, but once you get into like the throes of the job process, the job search process, and that can be like a whole different thing to talk about. I think something that I found for networking is like the people who interview you, even when you don't get a job, that is a networking opportunity. And like, I have literally had coffee with somebody who like didn't give me a job. You know, like a month later, hey, I wanted to let you know that I got this job. I really enjoyed our conversation. Would you ever like consider grabbing coffee with me? Like, I really thought like your work was really interesting, and like let's continue to like keep that communication open. It almost relieves that pressure of like, well, before, like when we had a conversation, I wanted something from you, right? Like I wanted a job from you. But now I just want to make it clear, like, I respect you in your work, and I think I can learn from you. And I think as a young professional and just starting out and trying to gain experiences, it's always of such value to be able to have those conversations with people who have been doing it for different amounts of time. Like, oh, you're in the field that I want to be in, and you've been there for 5 years. You've been there for 10. I had a conversation with someone who's like, I'm trying to leave this field. And I thought it was so interesting to hear him talk about where he was going next after 20 years of what I want to do. He's leaving, you know? So any conversation that I was able to have with somebody who didn't offer me a job was still really productive for me, and just learning. I would also say that earnestness of reaching out to people and talking to them without like, also I need something, is very important. Like I would say that that's one of like the biggest tips that I could give you, is don't always reach out to someone because, oh, can you look at my resume? Oh, can you be my reference? Make sure you're checking in with somebody and actually asking them about their life, you know, if that's appropriate. If you have the relationship to ask about their personal life, if you have the relationship to ask them where they are, what's their next step. Don't always ask questions for yourself. Get to know the person, because I think sometimes people feel like they're being hit up, you know, all the time. And there's like a certain level of like, oh, here comes, you know, Lexus asking another question and like asking me for something, rather than actually talking to me as a person, if that makes sense. And then the very last thing is to network outside of your specific field and industry. So if you meet somebody and they're just like a cool person, even if they have a job that you have never considered, just forging those connections, you never know where that's going to take you. I ended up attending an event one time that wasn't a professional event for higher ed or anything about education. It was literally a gathering for just an example of Latino professionals in Boston. And I was like, okay, I was like meeting people who were like working in hospitals and working in politics. And like, it's like, I don't know if we're ever going to cross paths again, but you know, I got you on LinkedIn, and you know, one of those connections led to like freelance graphic design work. You just never know, you know what I mean, how that person that you're connected to can come through later on, or if they can all of a sudden be a person who can introduce you to somebody who is going to get you somewhere, if that makes sense. So that's definitely something that I would say, just volunteering. Like I live in Salem, Massachusetts, volunteering in downtown, like during like the craziness of Halloween, like just as a resident, being able to like put on a vest and being like, here's a map. You meet so many interesting people doing stuff like that. And even just knowing folks like in the Chamber of Commerce in your city it's gonna have a result somewhere. It takes building those things, building those relationships earlier to then see those results later. So it's kind of a waiting game. It's kind of like a long-term thing, and not just like, hey, you work at a company that I want to work at. I want to work there. Like that's awkward. You really need to like have something in between meeting somebody and then asking for a favor.
So I would agree with all of that. I would also say two things. One is mentorship. Finding a mentor is super important. And that's sort of a little nebulous, but somebody that you are in contact with at least a couple of times a month, somebody who's maybe a professor, somebody who's well established in their career, and is somebody that you can go to with questions. And when it comes to networking, importantly, they can say, hey, here's somebody who would be good for you to connect with. Here's somebody else who would be good for you to connect with. And then like both the other panelists are saying, is developing a good relationship with the people you do network with. And what I personally do is I have a spreadsheet of all the people that I, meet, and I write down when I last saw them and what any notes I had, and I try to, I'm not trying to be mechanical about it, but I'm trying to just keep track of people and keep track of them in my network so that I can reach out to them periodically. And what I would say is that the majority of the jobs that I've gotten, both in college and out of college, were from people who are advocating for me behind closed doors. So you want to be in a position where other people think of you when there's a job that comes up, so that they don't have to necessarily go and post it to the whole public and go through a whole search process, but they think, oh, I remember that person and maybe they would be interested in this job. Let me ask them before we make any further decisions. So mentorship and just developing meaningful relationships with people.
Nice. I feel like I'm getting so many great little tidbits from you guys. This is wonderful. So we got a lot of questions about networking, because I think this was sort of a point where students feel like they need some direction. And it is hard, and as you mentioned, awkward. So we have touched on a little bit of this, but are there any specific strategies or resources that you either used when you were a student or in your current life on either building your networking skills or getting more comfortable with networking? I didn't give you an order. I'm sorry. We'll go Timothy, Marissa, Steferine.
Okay. I would say the big one that I use and that other people have taught me is whenever you have a networking meeting, to ask for 2 other people to connect with. So it might seem a little awkward at the end of your 30 or 45-minute coffee, but you just say to them, or in a follow-up email, you say, who are 2 people that you think would be good for me to connect with on X and Y? You know, who would be 2 people to talk to about, you know, a career in production, or who is somebody good in, you know, specifically nursing, so that you are starting to build out through other people your network. So that would be the most concrete thing. And then just like what I said before, is having some way that works for you to keep track of all the people that you are meeting and keeping track of their contact information, writing down when you last reached out to them, when you last met with them. And then also like sort of putting together where they work, what they're interested in, so that you know who you can go to later on.
So I agree with what was said earlier about having a mentor. I was very fortunate during my time at the Chamber of Commerce. I, was hired right out of college, which was wonderful. And I was one of the only people of my graduating class who got into, a job that was career field related. Unfortunately, when I was graduating, the economy wasn't great. So I certainly sympathize with students who are entering the workforce now. I was really one of the only people I knew that wasn't working in retail or wasn't working, in hospitality, looking for that next job. And working for the Chamber of Commerce, I was very fortunate because my job tracked all of my networking connections, because it was my job to get people to come to my events and introduce them to other people. So I think that gave me a little bit of a leg up. I didn't have to, keep that kind of spreadsheet. It was literally my job to know where these people were and what they were doing and the events that they were going to. But as you're venturing out, you're dealing with some additional barriers. Obviously, now you're not going to in-person meetings and events, and everything's virtual. And although it's a great opportunity, and thankfully we have this technology during this time, you do lose a little bit of that personal connection. So I think any updates you can make to your LinkedIn profile, any way that you can sell yourself in the absence of being in a room with another person, works in your favor. And something that, I've worked with graduate assistants in my time in higher education, or interns. I've had several interns from Fitchburg State when I was at the Chamber of Commerce, and then when I was in healthcare. And those all 3 jobs I've had are completely unrelated in any way, shape, or form. But the common thread was I was always trying to sell the skills that I had. So although I had no idea what a Chamber of Commerce did when I started there, I knew that I could be an event manager because I had run events in college. I knew that I was detail oriented, and I knew that I was organized, and I knew that I had a knack for remembering people, some of those things. So it's always about selling your skills. Maybe you don't know the industry. My mom's been a lifelong nurse. That's all I knew about healthcare, but I was able to show what I did at the Chamber of Commerce could be parlayed into the role in the healthcare system, because I was bringing along those skills. So it doesn't always matter if you know the industry. I mean, having some knowledge of the industry is always helpful, but it's about selling how you can fit into that role, not how you already worked in that industry. I went from healthcare to higher education. My only experience in higher education was being a college student. But I was able to show, these are all the projects I was able to run at the hospital. These are all the skills that I acquired. And we had a very small department at the hospital. So I was able to show that I could do a little bit of everything. I knew a little bit about social media, and I knew a little bit about this, and I did some writing, and I did some media relations, not to the extent that someone would specialize in those roles, but I was able to show that I could pick up things quickly and I could use the skills that I brought to the job to make the role fit for me. And I think for current students, something that I've always advocated is, if you're in clubs and organizations or you're taking the lead on a project in class, when you go out applying for jobs, a lot of times they're looking for 1 to 3 years experience. And I always felt, well, how do you get 1 to 3 years experience if nobody will hire you because you're right out of school? Use those experiences in school, leading a board of a club organization in school, running lead on a project, working on campus, organizing an event, volunteering. All of those experiences are job-related experience, even if you weren't being paid for them. So you can really take that experience, although you were volunteering your time, or you were working as a student ambassador, or you were working as a tour guide. That shows that you have people skills. That shows that you can, excel at time management because you had your studies and then you were doing this off hours. All of that, your internships, all of that coupled together really gives you a couple of years experience, and you can tout that on your resume and as you're interviewing with people. So although you may not have experience in the sense that you were paid for that work, like a career, it is experience that you're cobbling together to make you a more marketable employee. And you can really use that to show how you could fit into whatever company or whatever role you're going for. I think you just have to advocate for yourself in that way. Although you weren't employed by Fitchburg State per se, you dedicated 30 hours a month to this club and this job and, this project on the side or this volunteer opportunity. Make sure that you really sell yourself in that way, because that was your time and your energy and your organization and all of your skills were put into those projects. So that is relevant experience that you can use to launch your career.
Just to add something that hasn't been said, and I think Marissa mentioned social media. I think one thing that I learned too that's very important is the ability to have your professional self online. And I think it goes past like not having bad things online. I think a lot of the workshops that I used to go to is like, make sure like, whatever you're doing in your personal life and your personal time, can't be traced back to you. I feel like the opposite is also true. Make sure whatever you're accomplishing is online, right? I think this is like personal for me because I have such a unique name. It's like impossible to not have me come up when you Google me. Don't do it, but you can if you want, because I've worked really hard to like refine how, my name is out there, because it's very easy to find me. And that might not be something that you see for yourself happening based on, your name. But I think that's why it's been so important for me to think about having, a whole Twitter account that does have my name on it, that is all professional. I'm only tweeting about stuff that I've learned in grad school, things that are happening in my field and industry, articles that are coming out. I have a little thought about this. Let me put this up. And that's easy to then, you're posting that maybe on your Twitter, then you're posting that maybe on your LinkedIn and all the very public places where people, when they try to find you, in case they do, they're like, oh, not only is this someone who I'm not finding anything embarrassing, like they're going to represent our company, I'm about to offer them a job, they're also representing themselves well, right? It's not just like there's nothing, right? Because there's something about that anonymity that I think it's harder and harder to do that in this modern age, to be anonymous or to not have that reach of being online. So I think use it to your advantage. Think about, okay, what am I putting out there? And it's regardless of what you're doing. If you're going to be a teacher, be on the blogs. Like, you know what I mean? Be on the blogs that are like, oh, here's like a cool worksheet for my second graders. Like, it might seem like that doesn't matter, but that matters, because that might be that random thing that like sets you apart from another applicant, that you can just like put in your resume in like a fun facts section. Like, I, have a very successful, 1,000 follower YouTube where I talk about my recipes. I don't know like what careers you're going into, but that stuff sets you apart, and it could be like that deciding factor. The only other strategy that I would highlight is like try to master the art of like cold emailing and cold calling people you don't know at all. It sounds so weird, but just an example, I mentioned that I have had 2 different jobs in the 2 years since I've graduated. When I was at BU, I was in such a specific area. It's a massive place. I was such in a specific office, specific department. It was easy for me to meet so many people just in that corner. But I had also the ability with a BU email address to email literally anyone in that university and just say, here's what I'm doing, here's how I'm connected to the university, but I'm very interested in your department. Would you consider, answering this question via email? Would you consider jumping on the phone? Can I come and do a tour of your department? And you'll be surprised, because if you've never tried it, you're like, would somebody answer that? Would a higher up even care? That never happens to them. You know what I mean? So when they get that, it's almost flattering, like, oh, this young professional needs to be mentored. Like, like appeal to the accomplishments that they might have had online. Like, I've emailed a professor and be like, I just saw like your podcast. That's so cool. It might seem like fake to you, but if you're actually following what's going on and you come across something, don't be afraid to like reach out to that person and see if they answer. Because the worst thing they could do is like not answer you at all. And you'll only have spent 15 minutes just, sending them a paragraph of an email. So I think that cold calling and cold emailing can be a strategy that you employ, just to get to know new people that are outside of your sort of bubble, because it's easy to bubble. It's easy to be like, well, the only people I ever meet are people who are doing like the exact same thing I'm doing. How do I meet people who are in a different, realm that I am? And then you'll notice that eventually you're not only meeting people who can offer you something, you're also meeting people that you can offer something to. So that's kind of a cool back and forth. Don't only be looking for mentors, be looking for mentees, because as young as you feel, that's going to become something super important for you as well, to be able to turn back around and do the same for somebody else.
Nice. Thank you all so much. Yeah, I feel like there's been some really, really good pointers, and I know I appreciate you guys taking the time for this. So we are going to wrap up with some sort of final words of wisdom. But because this is a small group, once we get their little words of wisdom, if anybody has any additional questions, all these questions were submitted by the students, but if you've thought of something or you want to ask a question, I do want to save a little bit of time at the end. If you've thought of something since whenever it was you had to submit these Thursday. All right, so final words of wisdom, quick, what's your tweet to remember you by? Order, that's right. Sorry, Marissa, Steferine, Timothy.
I guess, what I would say is, and I think looking at my career path and where I am now, my undergraduate degree laid the foundation, but once you graduate, how you're going to sell yourself is the work that you do outside of school. I did not see myself, working for a chamber of commerce. I definitely didn't see myself working in healthcare after my internship. If anything, I wanted to get away from that. But, my time at the chamber, I knew that I had no aspirations to be a chamber president. And that was really the only next step. I had hit a point where I couldn't progress anymore. And so I moved over to the healthcare system. And then over there, I had gotten to the point where I wasn't going to be able to progress anymore. So I think just always know that if you've kind of hit a wall, you might just have to look to pivot and look, maybe it's a different industry. I've always worked in marketing, communications, event planning, but I've worked in 3 very different industries. And I've never tried to just pigeonhole myself into, okay, well, I worked at a chamber, so I'm only going to work at a chamber. Or I worked in healthcare for 7 years, so I'm only going to work in healthcare. I think it's just gaining skills from where you are and then using that experience as a jumping off point to wherever you're going to go next. There are some people who are going to work in the same industry for their entire career. Maybe they only work for a couple companies. Maybe they work for several. My journey has been, while it's been linear in the fact that I've stayed in a similar role as I've progressed, I've really bounced around as far as industries. The 3 really aren't related. The only related thread is I'm bringing my marketing communication skills through, and I'm working in a marketing department. But what I'm doing now in higher education is very different from what I was doing in healthcare. Even just the things that I'm marketing. I was marketing healthcare services and community access, and now I'm trying to market, access to higher education and affordability and some of those pieces. So don't think because my first job is in one industry or my undergraduate degree is in this field that limits you, because once you start working, you're going to be selling yourself based on your experience. And quite frankly, after you've had a couple jobs, it really doesn't matter what your degree's in, you're using your experience. So although I am still in a communication field, I could have graduated with a completely different degree and still be where I am now. So don't think what you graduate in is going to limit you into the opportunities that you'll have in the workforce.
Yeah, jumping right off of that, I think don't be afraid to apply for jobs that you're not like 100% sure about. But once you are applying for something, give it 100% of your energy. So what I mean by that is don't pigeonhole like the types of jobs you even apply to based on like the same thing that Marissa's saying. Go for things that are slightly outside of your realm. But then once you're there, you need to go to that interview with the same amount of preparation as like the dream job. Because I think sometimes, especially when you're first starting to look for like your first like, career job, like this is not the same thing as like applying to Target. Like I need to like focus on this. Well, I think sometimes you find that listing that you're like, oh, look at the salary, look at the job description. I'm so in love with this job. And you want it. You want it so bad and you give your energy to it. And then maybe you don't get it. Well, if you can find a way to like manifest that same energy for every job, and you know what I mean? Like put that passion into every cover letter and every interview, it might just be experience. It might just be like, oh, so I've had 5 interviews and I was only really excited about 2 of those jobs. But those other 3 jobs, you might even number 1 get an offer from a job that you weren't even expecting to like. And you just never know like where it will take you. But I feel like that is something that really helped me to be putting out number 1 more applications, to be getting more interviews, even if it's a job, for example, out of state, like, oh, I'm not looking to move, but I found a job and it's, a couple states away and it's a great fit. So knowing somebody in the industry, if I get an interview, is going to be cool. Maybe one day I will be more open to moving. Or if I go for this job and I put all my energy into it and then I get the offer, then I can make the decision, no, I'm not going to do it. Or actually, maybe I should, give yourself those options, even if you're not like 100% open to them now. Find the paths that you want to like keep open, those lanes you want to keep open for yourself. And then make those decisions when you have the option rather than not even giving yourself the option at all.
I would say 2 things. Number 1 is surround yourself with people who you want to be like. So that goes for friends, the people you hang out with at school, the people you hang out with in your future career. People who build you up and can teach you new things are the kinds of people that you want to be around. And the second thing I'll say is don't be afraid to take risks. As I like to say, high risk, high reward. So the Barack Obamas of the world did not become president by, not taking risks. It was the brave things that they did and the things that they maybe thought they couldn't do that got them to where they ended up.
Great. Well, thank you all so much. Does anyone have any questions or anything they'd like to add from the students? No, they're just so full of wisdom. They're just soaking it all in. Matt, do you have a question?
No, nothing but thanks.
Yes. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you all so much. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see all the students next week. But thank you all of our alum. We really appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you.
Thanks. Good luck.
Thanks for having us.
Have a good night, guys. Bye.